It's beautiful. I love that.
But the problem is he's arguing always with himself.
Always.
So he's arguing and he's losing. He's sometimes losing the arguments. That's the problem.
That's the problem. When I lose, which is most of the time,
So call back.
I will.
So, wow. Well, a lot of stuff happening right now. We're in the
opening
middle
day
of
tomorrow.
opening day tomorrow. We're in the middle of Passover. Yeah, Dodgers had a really good series against the Angels, which was good because they did not look good up until that time. If they can play the Angels every day, it'd be good. Yeah, the opening day in the middle of we're literally like in the middle of Passover. We're at tonight. We're gonna say the blessing over the fourth
Opening day of the Dodgers.
day of the Omer. Yeah, it's yes, opening day, first day of the fourth day of the Omer. And the first day of officially of baseball season. I don't know what that means, but no, the reality is that we're in the middle of Passover right now. And wow, I mean, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that we're entering April too. I guess it's April Fool's Day tomorrow. No April Fools. Don't do anything early to fool me. But we are Wednesday night starting. Again, tomorrow will be April 1st. And, but again, today is the fourth day of the Omer, and we're going to count this time between Passover and
moist, right?
between
Rabbi,
Passover.
you're a better counter than me. When is Shavuot?
Well, what day is it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to
Makes
blow your mind right now with the fact that it's 46 days from now, but
I
that's only because
realize
know
that.
It's the fourth day
I realize that.
So no, this year it starts Sunday night. Sunday, what day is that? Sunday. Well, let me look it up real quick. Sunday, May 16th.
Okay.
May 16th.
Father's Day.
Father's Day?
No.
Father's Day in what country?
In June.
No, Father's Day, it's May 16th. May 16th. May 16th is
that Mother's Day?
No.
Mother's Day is
No, that's the third, the week before.
Yeah.
The ninth.
Yeah. Mother's Day is the 9th. And then Memorial Day is the 31st this year. It's the very end of the month. But
Chocolate and banana.
Erev Shavuot is the 16th.
That's really
Are
moist.
we gonna do something in person?
Interesting. We should say that we are going to be going to Orange Tier, which means
On Monday.
and again, that means 50% capacity for places of worship, which is interesting because it's really not the amount of people in the congregation. It's up to the issue of singing in public or singing in indoor space. And as of now, we're still waiting for Cal OSHA to come up with a guidance on that. Because right
I
now,
have a question for you then, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I know we can't sing, and then we watch these shows like, the American Idol or the whatever it's called, and they're singing right there in the indoors.
are they doing it in California?
Yeah,
Are you sure?
yeah.
They don't have an audience, Mike. There's no audience there.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, but they're singing it in public. I
No,
don't
if you
know.
look at, you're talking about The Voice,
The Voice
They have
or
a
American
band?
Idol or what have you? Yeah,
but they don't have a
but the
Audience.
judges are there.
Yeah, but I
there's,
don't
yeah,
I don't know if that's considered being open to the public, though. I think the issue is like if the talent and the actors or the judges and the crew are being tested, then essentially you're able to control it. I think the issue is that if you open to the public,
Gotcha, makes
then
sense.
but I'm not 100% sure, but I know right now it's Cal OSHA that is giving that guideline. It's a slightly different slightly different guidance than the CDC, because the CDC is still saying you can go up to now 50%, I guess, starting this Monday or something like that.
But
So
we don't sing in our synagogue, we chant.
so
What
does
I
chant
like
mean?
that.
yeah. So I think that's the only issue right now. Because yeah, we could be at 50% and we never, gosh, I wish we were over 50% every time at our
Right.
synagogue. So we should be fine. But yeah, it just means Harvey, though, that we got to get moving on the cameras. We got to get that stuff done soon, so that we can have the camera set up quickly. And yeah, it's going to be here soon. The vaccinations are now, I think, on April 15th, going to be open to everybody over 16, I think, or 16 and over on April 15th in California, or at least in LA County. So yeah, we have some exciting stuff to look forward to. And again, as I mentioned, tonight is the fourth night of the Omer. So we want to just say a blessing over counting these days between you know, and even if you haven't counted along with us, tonight again is the fourth night. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al svirat haomer. We thank you, God, for the mitzvah of counting these days between Passover and Shavuot, what we call the Omer. Hayom Arba'a Yamim LeOmer. This is the fourth day. Today is the fourth day of the Omer, which is starting
Almost.
pretty soon.
So you actually
pretty
start you start counting this on the second night of Passover?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the first night doesn't count, and then it's the count from there. So we ask God's blessing on us, and during this time of counting the Omer, that we should be protected, should be healthy, we should feel again God's light shining on us, and of course we're helping that process a little bit by studying Torah and by having a chance to at least glow in the light of Torah. And as I mentioned last week, we do something kind of strange right now, which is that we step backwards. This is what we read just a few weeks ago. And we actually will add a couple lines. We add a little paragraph, but we actually step back and we read Exodus again. And specifically, we read about crossing the Sea of Reeds. We read about that moment again, which is interesting because we read right up to the part of, we don't read all of Bishalach. We read right up to the point where they cross the Sea of Reeds and everything's good. We don't get the complaining and the grief that Moses gets right away when they're safe. So we kind of end on the really happy note. During Passover, we have a tradition of reading different sections of Exodus during the days of Passover. So we have special Torah portions that we read. Actually, why don't I show you that before we even go into this? I'll show you the Torah portion information during Passover, so you can see it. So let's take a quick gander at this. I'll be careful what I show you on my screen. I was actually just reading about recall stuff just now, so I want to put that away before somebody says anything. No, I mean, it was just actually Schwarzenegger came out and talked about the recall. Anyways,
You being recalled?
No, he was talking. They were interviewing him about the recall, so I thought that was an interesting.
The recall.
Little interesting piece that I just was reading. So let me just get on to the right bookmark and the right page here. So here are the readings for Passover. So as we go through Passover, there's a tradition of reading Torah during the days of Passover, because even during the days that are not Chag, that are not the days when we do a Seder and we're restricted from like doing work and doing business, transacting business. The days, the first 2 days of Passover and the last 2 days, you can see those are holy days. We call them Mikra Kodesh, or holy days, day 7 and 8. But And we actually, as you can see, we read Haftarot on those days, special sections from the prophets. But in the Chol HaMoed days, the intermediate days, we have different things that we read. So here's the weird thing. This year, because the end of Passover, well, Passover began on a weekend and it ends on a weekend, day 7 of Pesach is also a Shabbat. And so we read this special section here. This is what we're going to read today. Now, what's interesting is technically speaking, today, and of course tomorrow, as you can see, there's actually another section that we read. So today, the portion that we read during the morning service was this section, which is essentially a section we also just read, which is right around the 10 Commandments. It's the laws of Pesach. And it's fairly short. As you can see, it's about 26 verses with a final 7 verses, which is the section from Numbers that we read every day. That same section, Numbers 28, 19 through 25, which we'll look at today. Those are the sacrifices that we offered on Pesach, the list of sacrifices. Those we read as a maftir. We read that as a final section every day during Pesach. But then on these Chol HaMoed days, we read these different sections. So tomorrow, we'd be reading from Exodus chapter 34. On the next day, we'd be reading from Numbers chapter 9. And then again on Shabbat, which is what we're going to focus on, which is the longer part, we read this section from Exodus again, which is the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. So even though, again, it's the Shabbat reading, if we read today, the Chol Moed reading would be very short. It would only be these 22 verses from Exodus, from Parshat Mishpatim, which we literally read about a month and a half ago, not that long ago, sometime in February. Yeah. So anyways, so those are the portions that we read from the Bible for these days. And again, first 2 days and last 2 days, we have Haftarot that we read too. Here's a Haftarah. Here's a Haftarah. Here's the Haftarah. And here's the Haftarah. There's 4 Haftarot. So when you actually have a day that's a Chag, like a Shabbat, you read a Haftarah. So that's what makes those days special, is that we also read these sections from the prophets. You can
Who
also
determined this, Rabbi?
the rabbis did about 2,000 years ago. And what you also do on the maybe 1,700 years ago, between like 2,000 and 1,500 years ago. So it's been a long tradition, these sections. There are slightly different variations amongst the Sephardic Jews, a couple minor differences in other parts of the year, but not, they're like two or three times a year. Sephardim reads slightly different Haftarot. But you can see something else that's interesting, that on the weekend, on Shabbat, we always read 7 sections plus a maftir. So we read 8 sections on Shabbat. On a holiday, on any other Chag, including Pesach, we read 5 on the actual holy day parts, plus a maftir. So 5 sections plus a maftir is 6. On the Chol HaMoed days, we read 4, which is really like 3 plus a maftir. This last section, Numbers, is the maftir every time. So technically it's not, they don't call it a maftir, but really it's a maftir. It's a final section that we read. So on the Chol HaMoed days, we read 4 sections. On the Chag days, we read 5, with the exception of Shabbat, when we always read 7 plus a maftir.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
off the subject a bit, but can you explain what a maftir is?
So a maftir, technically speaking, just means, the word means the final section, the final seal, if you will, the final text. Sometimes the maftir comes from, most of the time, the maftir is literally the last 3 or 4 verses of a Torah portion. Occasionally on a holiday or a special day of preparation, by that I mean the days before the Shabbatot before Pesach, we read a special maftir for those 4 weeks between Purim and Pesach. But normally, because it's a holiday, we will read a section, a maftir, from another book. And generally that other book is Numbers. And this section for Numbers, we read on Rosh Chodesh, we read it on holidays, is the section, I can show you real quick, that is about what offerings you offer on said holiday. So the section from Numbers, it's always this maftir, is this section from Numbers from Parshat Pinchas, which lists the sacrifices that our ancestors offered. Again, that section, chapter 28. We read that on every holiday, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When we hold up that other Torah we're reading from, it's always set to Numbers and that page, actually, chapter 28. That's a Torah scroll that we brought back from Israel that really shouldn't be used a lot because it's very fragile. I keep it on that page and we never move it. It never moves. But again, on a normal week, like on a normal week of a normal Shabbat, the maftir is just the last few lines. So like last week when we read Parshat Tzav, the section that we read last week, we read this section right here, the last few verses. We read that it was a maftir. So the portion started chapter 6, verse 1, as we saw, and it ends in chapter 8. The last 3 verses are the maftir. What's interesting about this portion, because it's kind of a short portion, is that you actually reread the maftir. The last 3 verses you also read in chapter 7 and Aliyah 7, but then you reread them here. Sometimes in a really short portion, you'll read the last 3 or 4 lines as the maftir. It happens sometimes when you have a short portion. So just to look at another one, I'll show you this one. This was from a couple of weeks ago when we started, when we ended Exodus. We read this special, this is the last section, but we read this special maftir from chapter 12 because it was the Shabbat HaChodesh. It was the Shabbat before Pesach. To begin the new month, we read a special section from Exodus chapter 12, 1 through 20. So again, sometimes the maftir is a special reading from a different part of the Torah. And sometimes that's why people have a separate Torah so that they can not have to turn and scroll back, and they'll have that other Torah ready for a maftir. But again, in another week, let's just say February. Well, we had those special portions. Let's look at Torah portion. This is Bo. We read the last portion, and again, this one also we repeated the last 3 verses. The last 3 verses as a maftir. So when we hold back the maftir, and again, some people, I just realized this, again, some people read the maftir separately, and some people read it as part of Aliyah 7. I mean, we always do it separately. We always end and then the maftir. What's important about the maftir is that the maftir is usually is read by the bar bat mitzvah. And so the maftir is connected with the person who's then going to read the haftarah, the section from the prophets. And they both have the same root. Maftir and haftarah both have that root patar, which means to finish or to complete. And so that's why when we tell the bar bat mitzvah, you're reading your maftir, it's the last 3 or 4 verses of the Torah, and then they're going to read the haftarah. So the maftir is usually reserved for that person that reads the haftarah. Everybody kind of clear on that? I know it's a interesting thing to talk about, and we did have time to talk about it because we do have a shorter portion tonight. So it's a very opportune time to go into that and delve into why we read what we read. And again, we oftentimes give whoever is the honoree the maftir. So if you don't have a bar bat mitzvah, you can give a groom who's about to get married the maftir, or you can give somebody whose birthday it is the maftir. It's just a way of giving somebody by the way, it's also an easier reading because it's only 3 or 4 verses. So instead of having to do a reading of 12, 13, 14 verses, 20 verses, you read 3 or 4 verses. It's a nice thing for someone who doesn't read Torah a lot to come up and read the Maftir, which, by the way, is probably why we started out having bar mitzvah boys, when it was only boys, come up and do the Maftir, because it was hard enough that they had to do the Haftarah. I'm not going to make them do the full Torah reading. If you're a really good student and you study a lot, and you have to do the full Kriya, the full reading. I was made to do the full Kriya, but I wanted to. They didn't force me to do it. I mean, I remember I felt definitely if I hadn't done it, I would have been embarrassed because my other friends did it. And so I was one of the younger kids in my grade. And so by that point, I think I only had like 1 or 2 friends left that didn't. But look, the good thing is I felt peer pressure to read my Torah portion, which I wish other kids would only have peer pressure to read Torah portions. But I went to a Jewish day school. So, and by the way, that's part of the reason I had pressure, because the other kids who didn't go to day school shouldn't have assumed that they could do the full Kriya, the full Torah reading. So yes, I definitely had peer pressure, and I look back on it and say, wow, what a nice world I lived in, that my biggest peer pressure was whether I was going to do my whole Torah portion. Yep, that's true. That's a true story. I was a very, very sheltered young man. I was very sheltered. I was in a bubble before COVID. I was in a bubble. So what a sheltered kid. Anyways, I'm not complaining. I wish everybody should be so sheltered, honestly.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's weird. 40-year it's my 40-year anniversary too for my bar mitzvah this year. So when we get to that Torah portion, God willing, in a few months, I'll chant it for you in Hebrew. No, I won't. It's Parshat Re'eh. It's in August, I think.
Great.
It's usually in August, but see if I remember it 40 years later. Yeah, it's August. This year it's August 7th. Wow. All right. So let's step back again and go back to the Red Sea, which again should be a little refresher. And for those of us who are on the Tuesday that are studying Midrash on Tuesday, we're actually right there. We just left there a couple of weeks ago. We were still at the Red Sea. So this should be really good for people like Mike and Mary and Elise and Gordon that are on here right now. This should definitely be familiar territory, so to speak, at the Red Sea, being back at that moment. So again, we go back to when Pharaoh let the people go. God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer, for God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by the way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. We didn't talk about this last time, so I do want to take a moment. And again, as you know, you can find lots of stuff in the Torah that you maybe never even talked about ever. But I know we didn't talk about it a couple months ago or a month and a half ago when we read this. We did mention, and again, we just read it. God didn't want the people to have to go to battle against the Philistines. And what's ironic about that, of course, the Philistines were at the time one of the inhabitants of the land of Israel. They were an Aegean people, so they're Greek peoples, ancient Greek peoples who came from the area around Greece and had settled through the isles in the Mediterranean, including Cyprus, which is not too far away from Israel, including Crete. All of those islands that kind of like have a substantial population, even going back to the Bronze Age, those are Philistines that made those. So they were amazing soldiers and sailors and occupiers and colonizers, and they really were a powerful sea people. They even went to war against the Egyptians, because we have records, the Egyptians have records of going to battle against the Philistines.
Mhm.
And so God figures we don't need the Israelites who just came out of Egypt to have to fight these people. Now, as we said, it is ironic because by the end of this portion, which we're not going to read today, but we did read it before, in the same portion that we read about the Sea of Reeds, we also read about the war against Amalek. That's actually what it ends with Israel being led in battle by Moses, remember, holding up his arms, Joshua and Hur holding up his arms so that they can defeat the Amalekites. So they end up going to war. So God didn't want them to fight. And again, you can make the argument the Amalekites are not nearly as strong as the Philistines or as scary, and but it also could be they end up fighting anyways, and that wasn't part of the plan. So keep that in mind, that there is that irony that it doesn't say I don't want to fight the Philistines because they're so much more powerful than anybody else. It says they'll have a change of heart when they see war, and they'll return to Egypt. Which, by the way, if you read that literally, it actually seems to imply that the people have the power to return to Egypt. Like if they decide to go back to Egypt, they could go back to Egypt. It doesn't say, and I'll stop them or that I'll destroy them if they go back to Egypt, which God could have said, but God doesn't say that there.
But it also says they were armed. How were they armed?
Exactly. So that I wanted to get to as well. Does someone want to say something before that? Because that is exactly
I'm
where
sorry.
I'm going. No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Does anybody else want to say anything about that? So instead of going north along the Mediterranean, they go south, and they go through the wilderness, which of course will take them to Mount Sinai, which again, if they had gone along the Mediterranean, much closer, much faster, and would have gotten there quicker, and would also beg the question, how would their journey have been different? Maybe they wouldn't have been as scared. So if you follow all of those implications, all of those consequences out of that maybe God should have let them go along that route because they ended up fighting anyways. They ended up losing heart because they're in the wilderness for extra time. And one can make the argument that by the time they send the spies in, which is what finally gets them punished so that they have to wait 38 years to go in, maybe if they had gone in quicker, they would have been more inspired. But who knows? I mean, that's one of those questions that this is what we have. There does seem to be something weird here because God doesn't get them to not fight. And that's what's interesting about that line that Joyce just picked up on too, which is, we didn't talk about it last time. It says the Israelites went up armed out of Egypt. And what's interesting about this phrase is that we know they had wealth when they came out of Egypt. It says that repeatedly, that they had wealth.
Yes.
But the fact that they also came out with let's say as military gear for soldiers, came out with weapons, assuming that's bow and arrow, sword, shields, some kind of armor, some kind of, which they had in the Bronze Era, we know they had. So it's strange because it says that they'd have a change of heart if they went to war, but it says that they came out armed. By the way, I just want to see something really, really fast. If that is the translation that they use, or what translate, I'm sure they don't use the exact translation in other translations, but I'm interested to know how they translate that in other places. This is, hold on a second. Okay. So here's one of the translations that I like. I like the the new international version, what they call the NIV. I don't know. Somebody must have told me it was a good translation. One of my professors. It says they came out of Egypt ready for war, which is even more than armed. Let me just see one other translation. The New Revised Standard Version says, hold it one second. The Israelites went up for the land of Egypt, prepared for battle. It's interesting, by the way, that every translation of verse 18 is slightly different. By the way, it shows you that translations, even English translations that are written in the Revised Standard Version and the NIV were written within years of each, within a decade of each other, or a decade or two of each other. So it's not like this is old English. Just so you know, the King James says that they were harnessed out of the land of Egypt. Harnessed. That was the King James translation.
I don't even know what that means.
By the way, I think that might actually be. I'm looking at one of the Jewish translations, more Jewish translations. It's ready for battle, and that one too. Just want to see one other one to see if I want to see the New American Standard, which is the Catholic translation, except one of the main Catholic. Again, different. Went up in battle formation from the land of Egypt. Wow. I mean, I just gave you 5 different translations.
Yes.
Only 2 of them were in agreement with each other. Ready for battle was the only one that came up twice. So it shows you how different the translations are. I mean, I think we'd all agree that armed sounds a lot less violent than ready for battle, right? It sounds a lot more passive, if you will. Armed definitely means they're ready for battle, but it might just mean that they have armaments. Ready for battle seems to imply they were in formation, which is what the word chamushim could mean. That they were in formation, that they were actually, in battle formation. But there definitely is this possibility, at least with the original Hebrew, that we're talking about people that were like literally ready for war.
Well, they were being chased as they left. So
but the problem is they don't know that they're being,
defend yourself at least.
they don't know that they're being chased yet. That's the weird thing. They don't know it. They don't know at this point that they're being chased. Because they don't know
that the
we don't know that yet.
Closed over.
We don't know that until the next chapter, which is right here. So it is a weird thing that the Torah does tell us that. And again, I'm glad you picked up on it, Joyce, because we didn't talk about it before. And the Torah, and we're talking about it now because the Torah does give us this piece of information that if I think what we're kind of saying is maybe they expected Pharaoh to change his mind. And so they were prepared, which is different than sending people into a situation where they know that they're going to have to fight, which God seems to not want them to be in a situation of. What's really interesting about what happens with the Egyptians, as we're about to see, is that God does all the fighting for them. They don't have to do any fighting. They literally, the whole purpose that as you're going to see, is that God does all the fighting. When they fight Amalek, it's the exact opposite, in that they actually fight. And according to what we read, they actually are dying. When Moses's hands aren't up, they're losing the battle, which means people are dying. So it it's interesting that the people seem to be prepared for war. God doesn't want them to fight, and they end up fighting anyways. So all of those things are going on there. There's actually three things that you have to keep in mind. The people are ready for battle. It's actually four things.
Yeah.
They're ready for battle. God doesn't let them fight at the Red Sea. He doesn't take them through a place that they're going to have to fight against the Philistines. And that's actually in a different order. Not fighting against, they don't fight it at the Red Sea, and they end up fighting against the Amalekites. So all of those things happen in this Torah portion, and it all again kind of begs the question: was this the way things were supposed to be? Did things go according to plan for the Israelites and according to plan for God? Did God mean for this? You know, we tend to think that, like, well, God must know what's going to happen, that God has a plan. But how is that possible when it says that God didn't want them to fight?
There's another factor. They were slaves. With a slave mentality, you don't feel strong. You feel weak and beaten down, and they weren't in a mental condition to fight. And God had to know that.
Yeah. And people oftentimes talk about the fact that, again, that I forget who mentioned it the other night at Passover, that these people are not ready to go to the promised land, that these are people who are they're not ready. And actually it was in our JLTV recorded Seder. Scott Rubin talked about it in his little greeting that he did during which, again, Scott's also hosting a show called The Word on JLTV where they're doing Torah Study every week. We filmed the first 10 episodes. We're going to do another series this year coming up, but it's available on YouTube if you want to look up The Word. He's got celebrities basically talking about the Torah portion. It's very cool. It's got, I think, some potential to be a really groundbreaking show, because you end up learning. I mean, you guys are all Torah scholars now, and honestly, I don't mean that, facetiously. You really are. And so you might find it a little basic, but for people who don't really know Torah, a few people have told me they enjoy watching it because they learn and they're having a good time, and they actually learn as they're watching it. So it's called The Word. And anyway, so Scott was talking when he did his little message during the JLTV Passover Seder. He talked about that issue, that, again, when we really think about it, as Joyce points out too, these are people who don't have a mentality of being warriors or of being free people even. These are people who are just not ready yet for this kind of responsibility. It's really important. So it says, what did they do? Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you, which is what we heard in Genesis. Again, this is a fulfillment of that pledge. And we did reflect on that in that image. They set out from Sukkot and encamped at Etam at the edge of the wilderness. So this is the edge of the wilderness, but right at of course, at the sea. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart before the people. So again, they could travel at night if they had to. That's interesting too. We really didn't talk about that the pillar of fire does not just give them light, but it also allows them to travel at night if they have to. And so chapter 14 begins. The Lord said to Moses, just check one other thing. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp before Pi Hahirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. I was just looking at that line from Joseph, if there's anything else we want to talk about that before we move on. No. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, They are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his hosts. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is it we have done? What have we done? Releasing Israel from our service. So I will tell you, if you read that paragraph closely, that it is the courtiers as well. It's not just Pharaoh, but it says also his courtiers had a change of heart. So again, it talks about hardening the heart. Here we have hafech levav. His heart was flipped. His heart was changed. The word hafech is also turning it, turned, flipped. But it also says, and his courtiers. So he ordered his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in all of them. Now here we have the Lord stiffened the heart of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites as the Israelites were departing defiantly. There does seem to be a little bit of a change of authorship in that line. I will tell you, when I read it and when it happens like that it's so blatant, I do point it out, because here we have the phrase kind of gives it away that the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart. Okay. And it says that he gave chase to the Israelites as they were departing defiantly. In this version, it does not seem to be any lag time between when they left and when they're getting chased. So there is a little problem in that phrase, in that it doesn't seem to be, and it but there's not that much to focus on, because again, there definitely seems to be an issue here about Pharaoh changing his heart, his mind, his heart has changed. But more importantly, it does seem from like all accounts, if you will, that Pharaoh is engaged in the chase himself. Because it doesn't say he sent his soldiers. It says he gave chase to them. And it says, it seems as though Pharaoh is there when this is happening. I think we talked about it in class. I know we talked about it in Midrash, whether Pharaoh was actually drowned here. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelite caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? So again, it is right there. You brought us out here to kill us. That's what the people say to Pharaoh. So it's not a very nice thing, obviously, but they're scared. Is it not this very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be and we will serve the Egyptians? For it's better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Which has a question mark after it, but really, of course, is rhetorical. It's not. It would be better for us to be there and be slaves than to die here. But Moses said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. Now, it's a very interesting phrase too, because there seems to be this understanding that what God is going to do here is going to make sure that the Egyptians will never, ever attack them again. They'll never have to look over their shoulder again. This is it. It's over. Which, interestingly, has to happen here and not in Egypt. It has to be here. Anybody have any feelings or any guesses why it has to be like this? Why it couldn't be back in Egypt? Anybody? Why weren't the plagues enough? Why weren't we always talk about the 10 plagues? 10 plagues seem to have been it. Anybody have any thoughts or guesses? Well, there's one really weird thing, by the way. Well, there's a lot of really weird things that we have to ask ourselves. There was a plague that killed all of the cattle and assumedly livestock as well, which would have been horses. How did they get horses for their chariots? Now, if only the firstborn males, or firstborn, not males, if only the firstborn died, you could still get chariot riders and soldiers who were secondborn or thirdborn. So, okay, so maybe there's still soldiers there, but how do they even have horses? Well, assumedly, again, you have to assume the Egyptians went out and bought horses. I don't know how they would have trained them so fast, but let's say they go to Ethiopia or one of their neighbors and say, hey, we need a bunch of chariot horses for our chariots. They still had chariots. Well, folks, there's something that goes on in this portion, which we really didn't talk about before, but you're going to see it here today. And it's going to be very obvious to you right now, which is that what the Egyptians have are chariots. And that freaks them out, because if they're not destroyed, if the chariots are not going to be destroyed, then the Israelites are going to have to worry about that all the time. They're going to have to worry about chariots coming down on them for the rest of their journey. And after this moment, they're never going to have to worry about that again. Because if you think about it, the plagues affected all the livestock, or most of the livestock, maybe not these horses, but maybe the horses, they got new horses. You get new horses. It affected the people, but they didn't kill everybody. It affected livestock, crops, people, everything. What it didn't do is it didn't destroy inanimate objects. You can't really have a plague that destroys the chariots. And the chariots were a real threat to the Israelites, a real threat to Israel. And we know that because centuries later, during the time of King Solomon, the Egyptian army makes an appearance with all their chariots. And not only that, what does King Solomon do? He builds up a chariot army so that he has his own chariot army. In the ancient world, in the Bronze Era, chariots were the equivalent of nuclear weapons. If you had a chariot, you could take out a standing army with just a few chariots. Because the people, the cavalry, any kind of cavalry or any kind of standing army, infantry, anything like that, there were no match for a chariot. You couldn't stop a chariot. The chariots would literally just mow through the lines. So, and other horses, because the horses weren't the only thing. You had a guy protected behind there who could kill other horses, or again, you had two horses attached to the chariot. The one horse that the guy had that was riding against you was no match for you. So you could totally overrun them. So the chariots are a really big thing here, which you're going to see. Pay attention to it now, how big the chariots are and how many times you hear the word chariot in this Torah portion. Check this out. Here was we talked about, the Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace, right? You don't have to do anything. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march onto the sea on the dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Pharaoh, of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So the angel of God, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up place behind them. So, assumedly, that's kind of the same thing. It's attached. The angel of God, the sign is the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire. It's kind of shrouded, maybe, if you will, by those pillars. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell on the night, so that no one could come near the other all through the night. And Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split. So in this version, this one we have right here, he holds up his arm over the sea, and it happened all night. The waters were split. In this version that we just had here, hold out your arm over the sea and split it so that the Israelites will march on dry ground. Doesn't seem like it's going to take all night, which is why we sometimes forget that it says right here that it took all night. But it says the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. So you can see that phrase, Pharaoh, chariots, and horsemen, we're not even done with it yet. You'll see how many times that phrase is repeated. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." And there again, you can see it's the chariots. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, and the waters may come back on the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their horsemen." Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach, but the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites had marched through the sea on the dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on the right and left. I don't know how many times. Did you count how many times the word chariots and horsemen were used?
I didn't count. A
It was a
lot.
lot. It was a bunch of times. It was a bunch of times. It is clearly really important for the Torah to tell us this is where the chariots get destroyed. And if you will, it really does function like an 11th plague, which is that now Pharaoh's army is destroyed. As long as Pharaoh had an army, this was something that was going to be a problem for the Israelites. They'd always have to look back over their shoulder to wonder, are the Egyptians going to come and destroy us? And so the Red Sea really kind of functions as an 11th plague. It really is, again, probably the main reason why we read this during Passover. The rabbis chose this section because as much as it's about the Exodus, it really is very much, again, kind of like the final punishment that the Egyptians have to suffer in order for them to be rendered no longer a threat.
Mhm.
So how do we do it? We destroy their military might. We destroy their advantage that they have over us. Again, what we know about the Philistines is that they too had chariots. And the way we know that is because later on in the Bible, especially in the book of Judges, we read over and over again how the Philistine army, because they had chariots, the Israelites could never meet them during the time of Judges, during the time of Samson. Remember, Samson battles the Philistines over and over again. You can't fight, the Israelites can never fight the Philistines in a pitched battle because they don't have chariots. The Israelites don't have chariots. And so they can't fight them unless they're fighting on a hillside or in a campaign where they're able to kind of attack them with kind of a guerrilla attacks and being able to attack them in kind of in those days, asymmetrical warfare where it's not conventional fighting in a big open field, because the Israelites were no match for the Philistine chariots. It's not until King Solomon that we read about the Israelites advancing to that level so that they could be on an equal playing field with their enemies. And so when Samuel the prophet is telling the Israelites, if you pick a king, and remember, Samuel tells the people when they come to him and say, we need a king like our neighbors, he says he's gonna multiply his armies. He's gonna bring in chariots. He's gonna take your sons into his army. He's gonna take your daughters as his slaves. One of the things that Samuel says to them is that he's going to be able to militarily, do what your neighbors are doing. And they want that. I mean, at a certain point, what Samuel actually tells the people is, you're going to be able to be rivals of your enemies. And part of that is going to come at the expense, your expense. You're going to have to pay for it. And your kids are going to be their soldiers. And this is all part of the package. But the people are willing to deal with that in order to feel secure. And
Because
so
right now, if there were men on foot fighting people in tanks, it would be the same asymmetrical situation.
yes.
The tank would be like the chariot.
Yep. But it's a whole different thing now. And it's been that way since the 50s. And I'm going to tell you what Israel did. The way that Israel created a situation so that they never would have to worry about anyone's chariots, Israel changed the entire landscape of the Middle East in the 1950s by doing something very important.
Nuclear.
Yeah. And so what Israel did is they essentially neutralized the ability for any country to have a military advantage of them by becoming one of the first countries that had nuclear weapons. And Israel's never made apologies for it, because they knew that was the only way that they could survive. And it has neutralized their enemies. And of course, it also, again, is the reason why Israel, and hopefully the rest of the world, will be conscious of the issue of Iran having nuclear weapons. So this is very relevant to us today, because the horsemen and the chariots today, folks, are planes and missiles that can be armed with nuclear weapons. And so what happens here is that Israel neutralizes, or God neutralizes, their ability to attack, which again will give Israel a chance to be safe. Again, one can make the argument, what's the difference between Amalek, the Amalekites, and the Egyptians or the Philistines? The Amalekites don't have chariots. They're desert warriors who do not have chariots. And because they're nomads and people who don't have a fixed army, from what we know from the Torah description of them, they're not a threat the same way that the Philistines or the Egyptians are or were. And that's a really important issue for us to recognize, because the Torah is definitely definitely saying this. And we sometimes miss it because we kind of read through and we read Pharaoh and his armies. But I really wanted you to see the chariots and the horsemen because it's very important. And it's very important in the history of Israel during the Bronze Age. And it was very important as Israel emerged out of its tribal and nomadic position to being a nation state under Solomon and the Davidic dynasty. So David's son Solomon and all those kings that came after. From then on, Israel maintained, we know this from we know it from the Torah, but we have archaeological evidence that the Israelites maintained a chariot army because we have the stables. We don't have the chariots necessarily. We have maybe pieces of chariots, but we have the stables that they maintained for chariots. And that we know for a fact, that we found. And so this gives us a real understanding of what happened when Israel became a regional power. They had those chariots. So keep that in mind. That is, and we're not done with the chariots, by the way, but you can see that this is important. Not one of them remained. They don't have to worry about them anymore. So as much as the Israelites are saved, they're saved, the Egyptian army and the chariots are destroyed. So thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. By the way, it doesn't say Pharaoh. It doesn't say Pharaoh. We don't know what happened to Pharaoh. We don't. And as we talked about in Midrash class, we don't know what happens to Pharaoh. The Midrash speculates that Pharaoh was punished by having to be underwater and doesn't die. He's tormented by being buried underwater. Folks, all I can tell you is we don't know for a fact. So it's kind of open to interpretation of what actually happens during this time to Pharaoh. No, says he was there. So they says when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord wielded against the Egyptians, again, this is all God, the people feared the Lord, they had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses. What a happy ending, until of course we get to chapter 16 when they no longer have faith in the Lord or his servant Moses and say, where's our food, Moses? Where's our food? And of course, as I talked about last time, my little mini message for Passover, that's because the Egyptians are the Israelites are like every other human being at this point, which is they want to go back even to bad times. If they're familiar, they can get nostalgic about even bad places, which Egypt continues to be for them. So now we get to the Song of the Sea. And this is the last part. This chapter 15 is the last part of the Torah portion that we read this week for Shabbos. So we'll read it again. This is the Song of the Sea. See if you notice something right from the beginning of the Song of the Sea. Az Yeshir Moshe v'nei Yisrael dashira zod. Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord. Ashir al Adonai, ki ga'oga. It's a wonderful phrase. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Slightly different. Horse and driver, but pretty much the same. Chariots, folks. Chariots. The chariots. And of course, here it's poetic. Here it's in a song form. And it is a beautiful phrase, right? It's a horrible thing. Somebody drowned. But it's horse and driver he's hurled into the sea. Again, we mentioned this before. This might be the oldest. Some people believe, biblical scholars who study this regularly, believe that this is actually the oldest part of the Torah. This is the first text that, again, we can say maybe this was the earliest text that we have in the Bible, this song, which means that maybe it's from 3,000 years ago or 3,200 years ago instead of some of the other parts of the Torah around it, which
Is
might
the
be
song
from
of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, but the Dead Sea Scrolls are only 2,000 years old, so all of that's going to be there. The question is like, where was this text before? We don't know, but it does seem like either it was an oral text, like a song, which it could have been, which is why it is a song and it could have been sung, or it is in fact a text that somebody had that, again, people knew and sang and well, had to go here. And so there does seem to be, again, some things in here that people have pointed to of why this is old. We'll take a look at it. So the Lord is my strength and might. He has become my deliverance. Again, biblical poetry, repeated phrase in both parts. But again, very beautiful. And again, people still use this or parts of this for our prayers. You know that. You know what's coming up. Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shemo. This is an interesting line. The Lord, the warrior, the Lord is his name. That's an interesting way of translating it, but it literally means God is, or the Lord is a man of war. That's what it means. Ish milchama means God is a man of war. God is a warrior. That's okay. It's a go okay translation, but it definitely has this idea that God is a fighter. Pharaoh's chariots and his army, he is cast into the sea. And the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps covered them. They went into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. So, I mean, again, that's Yemin Cha. And then the same word is used, Yemin Cha. It's hard to come up with a synonym. It's the right hand. You could say, if you really want to be poetic, you'd say the hand of strength. Sorry, lefties, but that's what they considered the hand of strength, the right hand. But that's what it means. Yamin means the right. So again, same phrase. Same kind of idea in both phrases. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea, which again is this image that it's almost like the sea froze as it's piling up, as the walls are being created. It's almost like it's frozen. The foe said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall subdue them. That's the words that the Egyptians would have said. You made your wind blow, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendors, working wonders? Again, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, no ra tehilot osefela. So that's the phrase we use every day when we pray. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. So this interesting phrase from verse 11, chapter 15, verse 11, the middle of the poem, the middle of the song, if you will, is the part that we chose to put into our daily prayer as an example of God's redemption, of God's saving us. We call this the prayer of God's redemption. Birkat HaGeulah. This is the prayer of God saving us. What's interesting about this phrase, and it's a great phrase. I mean, what can be compared to you, God? The interesting phrase, the interesting problem or textual issue with this, if you will, is that the phrase actually is somewhat theologically problematic, because it says mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, which literally translates as who is like you, God, among the gods. The word elim is another word, is a cognate of the word Elohim. What God is like you, God? Now, of course, this translation being a fairly religious, Orthodox accepted translation that we're reading right now, they don't like that phrase. They don't like who is like you, God, amongst the gods. So they use this phrase, the celestials. It softens the phrase. Let's face it. I mean, the New International Version says, who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who among the gods, lowercase g, obviously, who among the gods is like you, God? Is like you, Lord? It's a good translation. That's why I like the new international version for an English translation. It's a good translation. It's a pretty literal translation. The New Revised Standard Version says, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? So they just reversed it. They, like the Hebrew, who is like you, O Lord, among the celestial. I mean, like the Hebrew, like the Jewish translation. The literal English says, Micha mocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods, Lord. So, I mean, it's just an awkward phrase, which is why they translated it this way, who's like you, O Lord, among the celestials. So, but again, to use the word celestial could be other gods, but it could be angels. And that's one of the ways that kind of Orthodox Jewish tradition has dealt with that, which is that there are no other gods. They're not even not powerful gods. There are no other gods. The phrase might have initially been like, there's no God like our God. Those other gods they're not powerful like our God. That's a possibility, which is one of the reasons why people say that this text is from an older development or earlier stage, I would say. It's still a development, but it's an earlier stage of Judaism or Israelite religion, which we would call henotheistic. It's not monotheistic in the sense that it doesn't believe that there's only one God, but it believes that this God particular to us is better than the other gods that exist in other places. Only later on does God exist alone. And it's only later that Israelites and later on Jews would say, no, there's no other gods, but that there might have been a stage in Israelite worship that said, yeah, there might be other gods, but this is our God. Now, we don't know that for sure. It's possible, especially if this is one of the older texts, that's maybe one of the reasons why people say that it's possible, because it's an earlier stage. It's possible. I will tell you this, and it is fair to say, and I must say this, it's difficult to derive that type of understanding from a poem or a song, meaning that people will say things in poetry that are not literal. So it's a little difficult to derive those types of lessons from this text in particular. That being said, I mean, you know, I'm sharing with you the information, and I can just tell you that if it is early, then okay, we're at a time when the Israelites were not quite believing only that their God is the only God. Now, why else would we believe this besides the text itself? Because you can't rely only on the text. We have to look at archaeology. We have to look at what we've uncovered. What we've uncovered is that the Israelites at this stage of their development, and even a little while later, are worshiping other gods. They're worshiping Canaanite gods. They're worshiping other gods in the Middle East. And so is it possible that Israelites were only gradually giving up their belief in other gods? Yeah, because the archaeology backs it up, and the text backs it up. In other parts of the Bible, we see that the Israelites are worshiping other gods. The archaeology backs it up. The text backs it up. The issue is would the song itself back that up? That's a stage that a lot of people will not go to. That's a stage where really, truly Orthodox Jews will not go to, because they don't want to say that there was a time when an Israelite would have said, our God is the best God. Not that there's not other gods, but our God is the best God. So I guess it just depends on whether you think that people developed or evolved their theology. And I think it's possible that they did. I think it's possible that they did. And the archaeology, as I said, backs it up. And the Torah itself backs it up. The Torah itself tells us that the Israelites were still worshiping Canaanite gods even after King Solomon. So, so the next line, again, back to the right hand. You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. more like the oceans, but again, that's why it's poetic. In your love, you lead the people, you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples here, they tremble. And now here's the part where people start looking at who's mentioned in this story. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia, the Philistines, the Plishtim, which again is where the word Palestinian comes from the Philistines. Remember, the Romans named Israel Philistia after they destroyed Judea because they wanted to wipe out the Jews and their homeland, and named it after Greek peoples who they were more culturally had a cultural affinity to, the Philistines, right? In some ways, they saw themselves as new Philistines, the Romans. Now, again, Philistines are mentioned. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan and Canaan are aghast. So people looked at this list and they said, oh, those Philistines are mentioned. Edomites are mentioned. Moabites are mentioned. The Ammonites, they're another people usually mentioned with Moab. They're not mentioned. Canaanites are mentioned. But it doesn't seem, again, like some of these other peoples are mentioned. Why are they not there? And so let's take a look. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone. Till your people cross over, O Lord, till your people cross whom you have ransomed. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established. Interestingly, this text already starts to talk about your own mountain, the place you made them to dwell, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, the mikdash that you have established with your hands. Well, that seems to be talking about Jerusalem, which is one of the reasons why people say this seems to be written by somebody who knows that Jerusalem is going to be the place where the Jewish people live, or at least worship, which seems to, again, reflect this kind of reality that they've kind of taken for granted in writing this song. Interesting that Har Zion is essentially kind of like referenced here, the mount where they're going to establish the sanctuary. The Lord will reign forever and ever, and that's the part that we also use in the Michamocha. We skip down to this part. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. God will reign forever and ever. And then we read the end of this song. So it kind of like flips back to this. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and horsemen went into the sea, and the Lord turned back on them the waters of the sea. But the Israelites marched on dry ground in the midst of the sea. So we turn back to the beginning, and this, as the song ends, which again,
Are we frozen again?
It appears so.
Yep.
It must be 8:30.
We'll just have to be patient. It'll get fixed. There we go.
Joyce, you're hosting now.
Hmm?
It said Joyce is hosting now.
Yes. Actually, I see you too big. So it looks like you're hosting. Hello?
With an outstretched arm.
Send kisses anyway.
And love.
That's right. Got that.
I wanted to know how Mike did on his second COVID shot.
I'm not hearing you, Cheryl.
I
Can you-
wanted to ask how Mike did on his
Hello,
second
Mike.
COVID shot.
Oh my God, guys. I can't believe it did it again.
Doing great. I had a
Us
little,
at least one time.
I'm sorry, I'm talking to Cheryl. That's
You
more
go ahead.
important.
You and me,
Cheryl,
Mike.
actually, I was fine. I was fatigued for about 36 hours, but other than that, I was fine.
Oh, good for you.
Sorry, guys. I do not know how this happened again.
It's
Welcome back,
Wednesday
Mike.
night.
Well, I know, but Mike, I actually, you know what else I did? I followed all the instructions. I've been updating regularly. You know, I didn't check today. And by the way, they update Zoom updates does updates. I've never seen a thing that updates more than Zoom. Like a couple times a week, they come out with a new version. I'm not kidding. And
They made so much
and-
money this year, they can do that.
I know, but they don't update it automatically. You actually have to check for updates. A lot of software, will give you a check for updates automatically or whatever. They don't do that for whatever reason, but they come up with updates all the time.
For the
What?
PC version?
I don't
Or
know.
for
The Mac. I mean, I'm talking about Mac.
Mac. I don't do Mac.
I know, but I'm just telling you, I've never seen a software, a platform that updates more than they do. I mean, they have like, they must have so many bugs in their Mac version that, but it never happens Tuesday morning. I mean, that's the thing I don't understand. It happens on Tuesdays, does it? Mike,
Tuesday morning, also 2 hours?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I can't understand it because I've also done things I don't do this. I don't restart the computer Tuesday mornings before class. I only do it before Wednesday. And the only thing I can think that I do is I do use more Safari. I do reference the Safari more on Wednesdays than I do on Tuesday mornings. So that could be part of it, because we did talk about that, Mike, that the Safari does the.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So it could be that, but I know that yeah, I'm not. Other than that, I can't think of anything else that I'm doing differently. And it's not the Wi-Fi because well, I don't know if it's ever happened when I've done it not at home. I don't know whether I've had this problem.
There's software you can get to test your Wi-Fi, the speed of your Wi-Fi.
Well, I do that speed test thing. I do that.
Okay.
I do that. It's not, I just don't know whether it's ever happened when I've been out and about, which I have done. I mean, obviously I've done it from hotels a few times. I mean, I don't,
we never had problems with that.
yeah, I don't think it's the Wi-Fi. I think it's just the computer. And I think it's Safari. And that's the only thing I can think that I do, but I don't have a choice. I have to use, that's the thing, I share an Adobe Acrobat screen on Tuesdays. I only go to the Torah, to the Safari. I only go to that occasionally. I don't use it as a platform. That, I could try that. I could try just putting the Torah on as a PDF and sharing that instead of using it off of.
So you're doing it online. You're getting the Torah online. You don't own it.
No,
You don't have a copy.
I have a few copies. I always have a few. I have a copy. I have a copy right here.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that.
I have
A copy on your computer.
I have a copy right here.
On your computer.
Yes, I have copies of the Torah, but the problem is
I
that
wouldn't use Safari then. I would bring it up on your computer.
I think I'm going to try that because I like the platform because it allows me to jump between pages.
Well, let me ask you another question. Do you have you can use other software on the Mac other than Safari, can't you?
I use Google Chrome.
Yes, I could use
or Firefox.
I could use Firefox or Chrome.
Or Firefox is also a more stable Firefox is more stable than Safari.
It's not, I think it's what it is it's using too much memory. I think that's what's causing it to crash, is that it's using too much memory. It's gotta be,
That's like.
that's what Mike, when you sent me that article, that was one of the things.
Yeah, it's what it seems like. It seems like memory has something to do with Zoom.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try in the future. I'm going to try to do it on. Actually, I'm going to try it right now. I'm going to try to put it on. Well, it's not going to do it. Well, you never know. I'm going to try to put it on Chrome right now so that you can. No, we won't use Safari. I just get I get lazy because Safari is the Mac based, is obviously the Mac based software. So I just get lazy and use that. So you're right. I now have this on Chrome. Now up on Chrome. I'm gonna share it right now. But again, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry that it did this.
Or even Duck Go.
Yeah. I'm trying to, I really did get a better laptop during this time, right at the beginning of this period, because I knew that we were going to do so much stuff online. I never get like the highest end anything. I always get like middle or low. And because I always know that I'm going to have to buy something else with Apple 2 days later. So I always get the cheaper version of it. But this time I kind of got a better, I did get a better, I got a better version of it.
Oh, there we are.
And yeah, there you go. So I splurged a little bit on my, I got a MacBook Pro, bigger screen deal. All right. So here's where we were. We were right at the end of the song. Because the next line is, then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with the timbrels. And so it wasn't just Miriam. It says that all the women went out after her to dance. And it says, Miriam chanted for them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea, which again is the line from the song. Shiru Ladonai ki ga'oga. So we assume, by the way, that it's not just the one line that she sang, but that she sang that song. In the ancient world, songs were known by their first line. We called it the incipit. The incipit was the opening line. So when the Psalms are referred to in the Bible, because the Psalms are actually referred to in the Bible itself, it refers to the Psalms, books, chapters or Psalms, right? Each chapter in Psalms is a different song. There's 150 Psalms. When the Bible refers to it, it doesn't say, look at Psalm 23. It'll say, Adonai Roi Lo Achsar. It'll say, the Lord is my shepherd. So everybody knows when you use that first line that it is the whole song. So, which is interesting because that's actually critically important. I've said this before. In the Christian Bible, it says in the Christian Bible that Jesus says on the cross, Eli, 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 lama sabachthani, why have you forgotten me? Oh Lord, oh my Lord, why have you forgotten me? If you read that line by itself, it seems as though God he feels like he's been completely forgotten and left alone on the cross. It's a cry of anguish. But if you understand when he says those words, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, or in Hebrew, lama azavtani, why have you forsaken me? It's actually the opening line of Psalm 22. So if what Jesus said on the cross was actually Psalm 22, which is a psalm of hope that ends with, again, God is with me. It sounds like God is forgotten you at the beginning, but it really is God has not forgotten me. Psalm 22, by the way, is right in the same section where Psalm 23 is. And so using the first line of a song is a very common thing in the Bible and in ancient world, because they didn't have chapters and verses. They didn't identify things by numbers. They identified things by the opening line, by a line. So assumedly, again, everyone knew this word, Shir al Adonai Ki Ga'uga, is a song. It's the song of the sea. So again, Miriam didn't sing one line.
She
She sang the song. So, yeah, it would be kind of silly to go out and dance around singing one line. So they didn't. They sang a song. They said, we know the song that they sang. We just read it. So this is returned to the narrative. Could they have had that line before and then just said that? Well, maybe, because there's a real question of who sings this song first, Moses or Miriam. And we talked about that before. We actually had that discussion before of whether Moses or Miriam or both are leading this song, which is why in the Reformed liturgy, they've now said in Mi Chamocha, Moshe u'Miriam. They say Moses and Miriam led them in song, because no matter what, both of them do sing the song. I mean, that's for sure. The question of who sang it first, whether Moses sang it and then Miriam sings it, I don't even know if it's that important. It's definitely important to recognize that Miriam did sing the song and the women sang the song.
Mhm.
Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds, which again, some people use the Sea of Reeds translation. Some say Red Sea. Legitimate biblical scholars, including my professor, Richard Friedman, say Red Sea. They don't say Sea of Reeds. They say Red Sea to make sure that you know that it's actually the Red Sea. They went on to the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter, which is why it was named Marah. Okay, that makes sense. And the people grumbled against Moses and said, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord and showed him a piece of wood, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put it to the test. He said, "If you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all his laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." Now, great way to end. That's not the way the chapter ends. The chapter ends with one more verse. And they came to Elim, where the 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there beside the water. And then, of course, you have a new chapter that begins. The Christian scholars who put in the chapters and verses decided to have a new chapter there. We don't end the parsha there. We don't end the parsha until after the Amalek situation, which is all the way here at chapter 17. And chapter 17, as you see, we go into chapter 18, which is Yitro. So chapter 17 is only 16 verses. It's the battle against the Amalekites, and that's where we end B'Shalach. But we actually end the portion for this weekend. We actually end it right here with this, not with this, which you could argue really goes with this. They came to Elim and setting out from Elim. You could put those two verses together. We actually ended it here at verse 26 with the words, "I, the Lord, am your healer." So this is where we end the portion for this weekend. Not with this other little next part of the journey, but with this. And what's so interesting is that this verse that we just ended with is a perfect summation of that last section we just read, because it kind of ends on already, where's our water? Okay, so that's already not a great situation. If we'd ended it back here, it'll all been good. But I think there's a point here, which is, first of all, well, brings you back to earth, which is that they start complaining again. This isn't the beginning of chapter 16, which is, again, now they grumble against Moses and Aaron about food. This is the part that we talked about before, that I said, this is where they say, why aren't we back in Egypt where we had our pots of food? I shared that before, last week, or the week before. But here is this situation of water. But really what it comes to is this last verse that we just read ends with God, with this, the last two verses, is that Moses tells them, if you, he says, I put a fixed rule. I put out this message to the people. I think the word that's used here is, chok, fixed rule, or a mishpat. It actually says both. Made for them a chok or mishpat, either one. And a test, and nisahu, right? So it's there too. He says, look, if you listen to God, if you do what you're supposed to do and follow the mitzvot, if you follow the mitzvot and the commandments, right? And the laws, the commandments, if you do that stuff, I will not bring to you the diseases that I gave to the Egyptians, which is, you don't get the 10 plagues. Instead, I'll take care of you and I'll be your healer. So what's, again, so beautiful about this is that you're not going to have to worry about Egyptian plagues if you follow the rules. Of course, the flip side of that is you don't follow the rules, you're going to get those plagues. And so what we have here is a perfect, what do we learn from Passover? Well, we learn that we were slaves. We learn that we never forget the experience of slavery, because, again, it teaches us to appreciate the world we have, and also to make sure that nobody else lives as a slave. But it also reminds us that that is out there. Those plagues that the Egyptians had, that's out there. And if you don't want those, follow the rules. And so this is a really important, if you will, another lesson from Passover, which we do think about this at Passover, right? We, at the Seder, we recount the plagues. We take a little bit out of our cup as we recount the plagues, but that's for a slightly different reason. That's so that we remember the suffering of the Egyptians. There's another lesson here from the plagues, which is you don't want those. Now, we always talk about it. And this last year at Passover, we really talked about, and the kind of the thing that I brought to Passover this year for people to think about was how the plague of COVID has actually been not one plague, but many plagues. And it is something that, as I kind of focused on something this year as a question, as a point of discussion, if you will, that's the discussion that I wanted people to talk about this year, which is why this plague is actually not one plague, but many plagues. And I shared that the rabbis actually teach in the Haggadah, in a part that we usually skip over, that there weren't 10 plagues. The rabbis actually teach in the Midrash that we read in the Haggadah that there were actually 250 plagues that the Egyptians got hit with. Like the plagues, each plague had parts of it that were also bad, that were also a consequence of that plague. So that was now, after a year of sitting with this plague and the consequences of it, I asked people to think about it and to give some answers. And we came up with 10 more plagues off of one plague real quick. You remember, Joyce, what we came up with? Unemployment, anxiety, social isolation.
Depression.
So many things, so many tragedies that came out of this, that people need to understand that every plague is actually has a lot of consequences out of it. And we can't forget that. You don't just focus on the fact that people got sick. Yeah, people get sick. People had darkness, but when they had the plague of darkness, other things happened. I mean, they could have tripped over, and they tried to move, they would have fallen and gotten hurt. I mean, there's consequences that you don't think about because you just hear it and you don't think about it. But when you live it, and as we've lived it this last year, we know that there's other problems. And again, when people look at this in the history books, if they just say, oh, well, there was a plague that affected, there was people went through a coronavirus, whatever. If people don't talk about all the consequences of it, they're going to miss the point. They won't learn from it, and they won't learn from what we did wrong and what we did right. Because it's not just about an illness. It's not just about somebody getting sick. It's about what you've done to, again, we have to make sure that we never do this again. We never, ever go back to this place. And this is what the message of the Torah is here. It's the message that we just read, which is that you don't want to go back. You don't want to go back to Egypt ever. God says that over and over again to them. Don't go back the way of Egypt. I'm taking you out of Egypt so that you never want to go back to Egypt. That's what God said at the beginning of this section. And now he's telling the people, or Moses is now telling the people, it's not just about going back to Egypt. It's having Egypt come to you. If you don't follow the rules, those things are going to come to get you where you are. God does not, the idea is God is not going to punish you, but instead heal you. And so it ends on a happier note. It's not a happy situation that just happened. The people complained about water and freaking out. They're upset. But the last word of this portion, the last word of this special portion is Adonai Rofer, that God is your healer, which is one of the names that we say. Again, one of the names, many names of God is God the healer, God the source of healing. And so this is a beautiful end here to the portion, and to, again, one of the last days of Pesach, which is God will be the source of healing to you. It's a beautiful phrase, and again, it requires us. It's requiring us to do something in order, again, for us to. We have a responsibility here. We have a responsibility here for staying healthy, right? There's something we have to do in order to stay healthy, but and so there's some responsibility here too. But it's very reminiscent of the words that we hear later on in Deuteronomy over and over again. If you listen to God, if you and the word shamoah right here, shema, tishma, if you listen to God. So it's very similar to those words. If you giving ear to the commandments. So I kind of just want to remind people that Passover is a time of reflecting on freedom, but it's also, again, it's knowing that we can't go backwards. And I think right now, especially now, that is on my mind a lot right now. I don't want to see us as a people, as a nation, as a community go backwards. We got to be moving forwards, and we've got to make sure that we don't go back in so many ways. I mean, there's so many things that I'm worried about that we're going to regress right now, and I don't want us to be regressing. We got to move forward as a society, as a culture, in science. We have to always be looking forward, and this is a challenge. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's about not going back to Egypt, and that is a metaphor for lots of things when we go backwards. So Passover to me is really a time of learning from the past, and that's why kind of my message was about not looking back nostalgically on this time and saying, I hope nobody ever says my biggest fear is that somebody's going to say, it wasn't so bad. This time wasn't so bad. I don't ever want to hear anybody say that. It's going to freak me out. I'm just warning you ahead of time right now. In 2 years, 3 years, if somebody says to me, well, I got to spend a lot of time with my family, or I know there's elements of this that are not bad. I'm not saying every element of this is bad, but if anybody says that we can do this again, we did it before,
No,
it'll freak
No.
me. I'm just telling you right now, that'll be a hot button for me. And it's not about politics. It's not about he did this wrong and this person did that wrong, or that.
mm-mm.
Not about that. I
So-
need people to understand that this is not the way people should ever be living. And the consequences to this, you don't understand how long we're going to be paying for this, for what we just did. And so again, I hope we keep people alive. We can never look backwards and say we did it wrong or we did whatever. But I just want you to know, I don't want anybody to look back nostalgically. And I said it. I mean, I'm repeating myself over and over again, but I'm doing it because I know people are going to do it. I know for a fact people are going to say, you know what, it was not so bad. I got to work at home. It's going to drive me absolutely bonkers. And I don't want to. I'm going to have to keep my peace and I have to keep my mouth shut. But I'm telling you right now, know that when you hear it, and if I don't say anything, it's only because I'm biting my tongue. So again, I don't want to repeat myself. I've talked about it a lot, and I'm not going to go into it, but I do want to tell you, to me, this is Egypt, where we've been for the last year. This is Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back. So, to me, this Passover is really about that. That's just keeps playing on in my head. And again, I hope everyone continues to be healed. I hope everyone continues to
And enjoying that matzah this week there, Rabbi?
Oh, I'm so not happy about that. But you know what we had tonight? I will tell you this. We had to rush it because it took a long time to get. We've now integrated something else into our diet on Passover, because my wife does occasionally eat rice now and I don't mean that means I only occasionally eat rice during Passover, but we had sushi tonight. And it's just, obviously we don't have fish, right? But we had rice and vegetable, and vegetables with it. So sometimes we'll get tempura. Obviously, if it's not during Passover, we'll get tempura. So I'll have a little snack with that. But I'll tell you, just having sushi tonight was already so nice. But we did have a really good meatloaf the other night. We're gonna do that again one of the nights. We had a really good meatloaf that we made up.
Is that an oxymoron, eating meatloaf and you don't?
No, it's not. I know it was with a vegetable product or whatever, but it was so good that we're gonna do that again. But yes, I'm so lazy.
Now, are you a vegan or just
No, I'm
vegetarian?
just vegetarian.
So you'll eat eggs.
Yeah, and I've had eggs, but I get sick of them. I get sick of them by
Oh,
You
I
would
love
love-
matzo brie. I love that. I could have that every day for breakfast.
Joyce, my dad made the best matzo brie.
Well, I should have your recipe because
I don't have it. My dad would never give it to anybody.
He doesn't share that.
He never shared. He kind of did in a way, but it was like, well, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. He never measured anything. He just made the best. He would make it almost every day during Passover. He'd make it for me.
and you can't duplicate it.
I tried.
You can come close.
I come close, but nothing like his.
Tracy had a matzo brie contest yesterday. She was up at the Jewish home in one of her places up in the Bay Area, and they had a matzo brie contest yesterday. So they had,
Usually with matzo brie, you get in the deli or something, you have to put something on it. Either syrup or applesauce. My dad's, you didn't need anything.
wow.
That's how good it was.
Well, according to my daughter, Dina was here a couple
Yeah.
days ago, and Dina said that the matzo brie that her mother made at least on Monday was not good. Would not have been in the contest, but I guess she made it like a fancy one. And it was she said it was too fancy. It had, I forget what she said in it, but she did not like her mother's matzo brie. But at least Tracy tries, she tries to make some new stuff and make it fancy. So make it a little different. But her dad, I know Tracy's dad makes matzo brie, and that's one of his things that he likes to make. So I don't know. I don't care. I don't like matzo brie. I like pancakes, and anything that tries to be like a pancake that's not a pancake is just gonna make me
Rabbi,
mad.
do you like
It's gonna make
French
me mad.
toast?
I
Do
do.
you like
I love
French toast?
I love French toast. I
Okay,
do.
my dad's matzo brie had the similar base
Texture?
as
I believe you. I
the
believe you.
batter was very similar. To,
I believe you, but you don't have it, so you can't prove it. So I will tell you that I hope it did. But yes, I love French toast. I love pancakes, but that's because it has bread in it. And that's all I want to eat right now is bread. Ugh, you're making me. I want to talk about food anymore. Listen, folks, we're actually gonna have class next Wednesday. I will be
Oh, good.
I will be in Utah next week. We're going to go skiing next week. So I'll be skiing, but we'll be here.
you might have a broken leg by then.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. That's my biggest, by the way, Mike, that is my biggest fear. So thank you for, no, I've been very lucky thus far, but I do know a lot of people.
Just go down the bunny hills.
I might, I definitely am going to be careful, but I don't
Start
want to
there.
ski. I don't want to ski scared. So we'll be up at Park City and we just like being there. So
How long has it been since you've gone skiing?
2 years. We were supposed to go last year and then we got COVIDed out.
Right.
But yeah, anyways, we'll hopefully be careful. I hope. But anyways, guys, have a great opening day tomorrow. Let's go Dodgers, and we'll hopefully have a good rest of Pesach.
Come on, let's go Padres.
Stop
What?
it.
Let's go Padres.
Stop it.
What?
Stop it. Stop it.
Why would you say that?
They're a great team.
I know, but that's a horrible thing to say. Like, I don't.
No, the horrible thing would be let's go Giants.
That would be horrible, but we're not rooting for the Padres, man. I want another World Series, one that I can go to, Mike. I'd like to be able to go to it, not have to go to Texas to see the World Series. Which I should have done.
Go see visit Cheryl and David.
I should have done it. I looked up the plane ticket. I should have done it. And I'm really, really mad at myself for not doing it. I gave in to my fears and I didn't do
So
it.
did you end up getting tickets for next month? Well, they're not on sale yet.
No, I did. I'll know tomorrow. I'll know tomorrow. But I think their Dodgers are still figuring everything out. The person I talked to over there said that they have no idea yet. But they've released tickets to season ticket holders, and
Well, they go on sale on Friday, I think they said.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Maybe it's
I
not
think that's what I
tomorrow.
read.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to try. All right, everybody. Stay
Wish you
safe.
all the best. We'll see you next
Good to
week.
see everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care. Great
Thank
seeing
you.
you. Hog some
Love
out,
you.
everyone. Happy